Hi guys, this is the first of 3 videos on Macbeth. This is on context, and I'm going to be focusing on how far Shakespeare endorsed the political views of King James I and how far, if at all, did he critique them. And I'm asking that because King James I was Shakespeare's patron, and whoever controls the flow of money to an artist also tends to control the expression and content of that artist's ideas. Now, King James I ascended the English throne in 1603, but for whatever reason didn't address Parliament until 1604. There he is, King James I on his throne in Parliament. And King James I saw this as an opportunity to sell his brand of kingship. And at this point, you really ought to be thinking of the divine right of kings, because that was the idea that he really did push across to Parliament. I have a God-given right to rule. King James I was an absolutist. He really genuinely believed no one should question his power. And if anyone usurped the throne, heaven forbid, there would be a God-driven disaster. So please remember the divine right of kings. He had other things that he wanted to say to them. He drew this massive distinction between a bad king, a proud and ambitious tyrant who only ruled in order to satisfy his desires and unreasonable appetites. So that was on the one hand. On the other, he presented the idea of a righteous and just king, which, as he said in his typical Jacobean and flowery way, doth acknowledge himself to be ordained for the procuring of the wealth and prosperity of his people. Now, King James I really wanted to sell himself as a righteous and just king. I'm just here, guys, to make you rich and happy. And he went on to say, if you be rich, I cannot be poor. If you be happy, I cannot but be fortunate. And I protest, I pinky promise, guys, your welfare shall ever be my greatest care and contentment. So did Shakespeare push forward either of these ideas in Macbeth? Well, clearly he does. Macbeth is a proud and ambitious tyrant who simply rules to satisfy his desires and unreasonable appetites. Does Shakespeare present a depiction of a righteous and just king, a kind of proxy for King James I, or a proxy for the way King James I wanted himself to be seen? Well, yes, he does, in the figure of Duncan. At the start of the play, Duncan is very happy that Banquo and Macbeth have scored a double victory, one against the King of Norway, two against the rebel thanes, and he's feeling incredibly generous, and he makes Macbeth Thane of Cawdor, but doesn't even then think he's nearly gone halfway as far as he should, because in Act 1, Scene 4, he tells Macbeth, more is thy due than more than all can pay. Similarly, in the same act, same scene, Duncan is at Dunsinane. He's about to have a feast, courtesy of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, in order to celebrate this double victory. And Lady Macbeth acknowledges that Duncan loads honours deep and broad on both Macbeth and herself. She really ought to be super grateful to him at this point, rather than contemplating regicide, which she is. So Duncan is this amazingly benevolent force, regal force, and it doesn't stop there. In Act 2, Scene 1, this is prior to the feast, it's nighttime. Banquo is wandering around outside Dunsinane, looking up at the night sky, wondering why it's pitch black. Where have all those stars gone? They've gone because Macbeth is planning regicide, and supernatural forces seem to be aiding him. And with him, Banquo has a gleaming diamond presented to him by Duncan as a gift from him to Lady Macbeth to thank her for being a gracious hostess. And in fact, when Banquo comes across Macbeth, he gives him that diamond for that purpose. Now, Shakespeare underscores Duncan's benevolence and righteousness by bestowing this beautiful imagery on Duncan to express. So, for example, in Act 1, Scene 4, Duncan says to Macbeth, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing. Duncan is presenting himself as a farmer or a gardener, and he's presenting Macbeth and all his fellow citizens of Scotland as plants in a garden or crops in a field. And it really does convey the idea that Duncan's sole purpose is to nurture and strengthen his subjects. And similarly, Duncan says to Banquo in Act 1, Scene 4, that signs of nobleness, in other words, the honours that he's bestowing on Banquo and Macbeth, like stars. Notice that imagery of light, which connotes heaven, shall shine on deservers. Duncan is making it really clear he's not just handing out honours to a select few. He's being universally benevolent. Now, it's not surprising that such a righteous and just king will inspire language of admiration from all the other characters in the play. And in fact, the language that all the other characters use of Duncan falls into a semantic field of Christianity. And you can see that in Act 2, Scene 3, when Macduff, you can see him on the left-hand side of the picture, exiting Duncan's chamber and looking absolutely horrified at the regicide, the act of regicide that he's just discovered. He says, as he exits that chamber, most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building. Macduff uses the metaphor, the Lord's anointed temple, to describe Duncan's body. It's describing the act of regicide as an act of vandalism against a church or a holy site. And in fact, Macduff describes Duncan's body as the image of great doom or the end of the world, underscoring this idea that the regicide could not be considered to be more impactful than the destruction of the whole of mankind, if you like. So with the use of this semantic field of religion, Shakespeare is already subtly indicating that he's really buying into King James I's notions of the divine right to rule. And I'm going to bring up some more language used by Macbeth of Duncan. If you pause the video and read through it, you'll notice that it too falls into that semantic field of Christianity. But tying into the divine right of kings is this great chain of being. If you take out a God-appointed king, then you will destroy the whole of the natural order. And I'm going to go into that and the ways in which Shakespeare further emphasizes this notion. But here's a couple of slides on the great chain of being. You can refer to your notes if you've forgotten quite what that means, and or pause the video. There's another slide, but I'm going to hurry on. Right. So how does Shakespeare underscore the idea that with the ending of the life of a God-appointed king, the whole of nature and the whole of society will be upended, destroyed, disturbed? Well, prior to Macduff walking into Duncan's chamber to discover his murdered body, Lennox, who has accompanied Macduff to Dunsinane, has a conversation with Macbeth, who's pretending he doesn't know what's happened. Lennox comments that the night has been unruly, has been, disturbed. He says the chimneys are blown down and the earth is suffering from earthquakes, is fervorous and did shake. And he comments on all the strange noises that he could hear, strange lamentings and screams of death. This indicates that the divine right of kings has been thwarted, the chain of being has been upended, and all nature has been disturbed. There's a random picture of a peasant, but I'm going to explain that in a minute. Shakespeare further underscores that in Act 2, Scene 4, in a conversation between an old man and Ross. Now, the old man doesn't have a name because this play is all about nobility and nobles and kings and queens, but Shakespeare wheels on the old man to have a conversation with the Scottish Thane to indicate that the consequences of the regicide aren't restricted to palaces and the nobility. With the regicide comes a disturbance of the length and breadth of Scotland. Everyone and everything is terribly impacted. Ross comments that day has turned into night. Dark night strangles the travelling lamp being a metaphor for the sun. And with that violent and murderous word strangles, Ross foreshadows the bloody, savage, and villainous tyranny that Macbeth is about to embark upon. Ross further comments that darkness does the face of the earth entomb, and that word entomb foreshadows that Scotland is going to become a grave for the Scottish citizenry, rather than the lovely nurturing field that Duncan has been sustaining so far. The old man is able to talk, unbelievably, and he comments that the falcon, the noblest of birds, has been taken out and killed by the humblest of birds, a mousing owl. And that too reaffirms that the great chain of being has been upended and thwarted and disturbed. So, order has been totally thrown out of the window. From Act 2 until the end of the play, Shakespeare focuses on the impact of the tyranny that is instigated by Macbeth. At the end of Act 2, Macbeth kills Duncan's guards. At the beginning of Act 3, Macbeth has a servant feed, in other words, a spy, placed in every noble household because he wants to take out any rebel thane before they meet him in the field of battle. In Act 3, he has Banquo brutally murdered and attempts to do the same to Fleance, Banquo's young son, the first instance where Macbeth is targeting children. He does that again and again throughout the play. In Act 4, Macbeth decides to give to the edge of the sword Macduff's wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. And in that graphic image, you can detect a kind of hysterical desperation. In Macbeth, he will do absolutely anything, take up the lives of innocent babies and children in order to retain his grasp on his sceptre, which is now slippery with the blood of Scottish citizenry. And it's significant that Shakespeare decides to allow the horrible murders of a woman and her innocent children to take place on stage. In Act 5, the final violent act of Macbeth is to kill another youngster, young Siward, a lad in his teens who's never seen battle before and thinks he's going to take on this tyrant. And here is a scene from a production of Macbeth where the actor playing young Siward doesn't really look as if he's any older than 13, again underscoring the fact that Macbeth is a child killer. So why does, and this is a bit of I'm going sideways here, why is Shakespeare focusing on tyranny? Well, he's focusing on tyranny, I suppose, for three reasons. First of all, it's a tragedy, and you need a tyranny in order to have suffering and to justify Macbeth's savage murder at the end of the play. Second of all, because Shakespeare is really promoting the idea of the kind of king that you really don't want. He's basically saying what you really want is King James I, this just and righteous king. But the third reason can't be underestimated. It's because of the gunpowder plot, which was thwarted in 1605. The gunpowder plot was a plot to take out James I, to kill him and to replace him with a Catholic monarch. And we still remember it today. And it's impossible to underestimate the impact that the gunpowder plot had on a Jacobean audience. They really genuinely felt that they had come within a hair's breadth of a tyranny being established. So Shakespeare references this to trigger the terror of the Jacobean audience of a tyranny. This is how close we came, guys. And he references it many, many times throughout the play. So, for example, King James I, in order to commemorate his, I suppose, divine escape from this plot, had a medal created to commemorate the event, which is of a serpent surrounded by flowers. So when Lady Macbeth says to Macbeth, "Look like the innocent flower, but the serpent under it," immediately the Jacobean audience are going to think of the gunpowder plot and align Macbeth and Lady Macbeth with those heinous plotters. And they're going to be all fired up against Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and truly actually detest them. Another way in which Shakespeare references the gunpowder plot is at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 3, where Macbeth's porter amuses himself by pretending he's the gatekeeper of hell to let in the new arrivals. The new arrivals are, of course, Macduff and Lennox. He exclaims, "Knock, knock, who's there in the other devil's name? Faith, here's an equivocator." And again, you can read these lines yourself. But an equivocator is referring to the Catholic priests who took the confessions of all those nefarious Catholic gunpowder plotters and didn't reveal those secret confessions to anyone. In other words, the Catholic priests who enabled this plot almost to be successful. Now, equivocation means to imply an untruth by using unclear phrasing. So the thing about the Catholic priests was this: when they were hauled in to face judge and jury, "Why didn't you tell us about these terrible plotters?" They didn't want to lie and say, "We had no idea," but they didn't want to reveal what had been confessed to them either. So they kind of hedged their bets in a really slippery, weaselly way. Now, the Jacobeans hated these Catholic priests. These Catholic priests were terribly tortured and then horribly executed for the crime of treason. So as soon as the porter talks about equivocators and equivocation, the Jacobean audience again is going to be fired up, thinking about these horrible, weaselly, traitorous priests and the traitorous gunpowder plotters, and are going to really see Dunsinane as a place that's equivalent to hell. They're definitely going to see Macbeth as the devil and Lady Macbeth as, I don't know, the wife to the devil. And it's a dramatic irony that the porter is presenting himself as the porter, because in effect that's what he is. So we got all these references to the gunpowder plot. We've got this idea that the Jacobean audience would have aligned Macbeth not just with this tyrannous ruler, but with the devil. How does Shakespeare restore order at the end of the play? Well, you would have thought he could have done it by divine intervention, because God must be quite angry that Duncan has been done away with, but he doesn't. He gets two human agents in the play to restore order. We have Macduff, the rather puzzled-looking creature or man on the left, who seeks revenge for Macbeth's slaughter of his family. And on the right, the young man is Malcolm, Duncan's eldest son, who is another picture of a just and righteous king. Again, he has the divine right to rule. So, in Act 4, Scene 3, Malcolm endorses the true qualities of a just and righteous king. He talks about justice and verity. Verity means truthfulness, temperance, moderation, stableness, bounty, generosity, perseverance, carrying through with your pure ideas, mercy, loneliness. You have to be humble to be a proper king. Devotion to your subjects, patience, courage, fortitude, all the rest of it. So he knows what it is to be a righteous king. And he sells himself too as one. He says to Macduff, I am yet unknown to woman, never was forsworn, scarcely coveted what was mine own, at no time broke my faith, would not betray the devil to his fellow, and delight no less in truth than life. So Malcolm here is saying that he's a virgin, scarcely wants what belongs to him, at no time ever broke his promise to everyone, and would not even betray the very devil, and he delights in truth no less than he delights in being alive. So Malcolm and Macduff, with the aid of the English king, will bring about the downfall, the physical downfall of Macbeth at the end of this play, and order will be restored. But there's another way in which Shakespeare brings about the downfall of this tyrant who rules only to serve his own appetites. And there's another way too in which Shakespeare endorses the views of King James I, and this is in the figure of Banquo. Now, James I was commonly believed, as you can see from this slide, to be descended from Banquo, the Thane of Lochaber, the historical counterpart of Shakespeare's Banquo. The witch's prophecy that Banquo's sons will be kings therefore takes on a new meaning. It refers to James I and his divine right to rule. As soon as the Jacobean audience hears that Banquo's sons will be kings and their sons will be kings, they're going to be invited to believe that King James I's line will go on to forever, and that is very flattering to King James I. Indeed, you could see the escape of Fleance from the murderers as symbolizing James's own escape from the gunpowder plotters. So there are two occasions in which Macbeth is utterly spiritually and psychologically vanquished by Banquo. So the first is in Act 3. At the beginning of Act 3, Macbeth seems totally in control of things. He gets Banquo killed. But at the end of Act 3, he is totally demoralized by the appearance of Banquo's ghost. So why does he get rid of Banquo? It's because he says, our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared. So Macbeth is presenting Banquo as a natural king. So in a play that proliferates in images of kings, this is yet another one. Banquo is yet another instance of a righteous and just potential king. He never becomes king, but he's naturally a king. And that's underlined by words like royalty of nature and reigns. And Macbeth is petrified of this. He knows that he's not a real king. He knows, as Angus goes on to say in Act 5 and Scene 2, that he is simply a dwarfish thief, someone who's stolen the robes of kingship, someone who's pretending that he can be a king. As Angus says, Macbeth has stolen the robe that belongs to a true and righteous king, and they appear like giants' robes upon him. He's so dwarfish. So when Banquo appears at the end of Act 3, Macbeth is reduced to a psychological pulp. He is absolutely petrified of his figure of Banquo, and the feast is totally disrupted, and Lady Macbeth has to send them away. The second time that Macbeth is absolutely psychologically and spiritually pulverized by Banquo's ghost is in Act 4, Scene 1. He's gone back to see the witches to seek reassurance from them, and they do give him reassurance in the form of those 3 apparitions. But the last thing they show him is a display of 8 kings, and these 8 kings are the descendants of Banquo, the proxy for King James I, and finally comes, as Macbeth sort of cries out loud, blood-bolted Banquo. Notice that plosive B sound, which emphasizes the unvanquishable sight of Banquo's ultimate victory over this pathetic worm that is Macbeth. And Macbeth says, the blood-bolted Banquo smiles upon me and points these kings out for his. This is what you get, Macbeth. Your tyranny is going to come to an end, and I and mine will rule forever. And Macbeth cannot stand the glowing light that's being emitted from Banquo's golden crown, and he cries out, thy crown does sear mine eyeballs. He's blinded by the light from Banquo. So Macbeth is kind of spiritually vanquished by Banquo in this scene. And all of these presentations of Banquo as ultimately vanquishing Macbeth, at least in a spiritual sense, really does flatter King James I and really does endorse his idea of kingship. No tyrant, just righteous and just kings. But does Shakespeare critique James I's views? And he really wouldn't be much of an artist if he didn't. Well, he does, because I'm looking at the sword that Duncan is holding here, and I'm thinking, really, you don't have a right to hold that sword, because at the start of the play, he's standing on a little hillock, being really super anxious and apprehensive, thinking, have my actual brave soldiers, Banquo and Macbeth, have they destroyed the enemy? He's too scared to face the enemy himself. All right? He just doesn't do it. So what kind of king is he if he can't even fight his own battles? The other way in which he's rather pathetic is that he just trusts anyone and everyone. He says of the first Thane of Cawdor, oh, well, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. How am I to know what a person thinks? If they smile at me, how can I tell that they're planning and plotting against me? Well, duh, you're not a very good king if you actually believe in everything that you see. You should actually perhaps be suspicious of everyone and everything. So he goes on to complain that this Thane of Cawdor was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust, not blaming himself for his gullibility, but the Thane, I mean, he's a Thane. He's built to fight. So why wouldn't you take on someone you thought was pathetic and rule yourself? So there's that. And then he goes on to make Macbeth Thane of Cawdor and to trust him. So he kind of deserves to be taken out in some way. And I wouldn't be surprised if Shakespeare was actually hinting at this as well. Now, when you come to Malcolm, he's equally an ambiguous figure. So he's quite Machiavellian. And you remember Machiavelli was this Italian philosopher of the Renaissance who basically said, if you're going to rule, if you're going to be a prince, if you're going to be a king, forget being nice and lovey-dovey to your subjects. You're going to have to rule by fear, and you're going to have to be super crafty. Otherwise, people will take you out. And we know this, that Malcolm is Machiavellian because he tests Macduff. That's why Macduff is looking so confused in this picture, because Malcolm doesn't know if he can trust Macduff. Macduff's come all the way from Scotland. Malcolm's in hiding in England. He wants to take back the Scottish throne, but he has to build up a group of thanes around him that he can absolutely trust. So he tests Macduff. He first of all tells him, if you make me King of Scotland, I am just going to be very lustful and have sex with as many young women and wives as possible. possible. Macduff says, fine. And then Malcolm says, well, more than that, I'm really, really greedy. I'm just going to absorb as much money as I can from all the Thane's estates. Macduff says, not so good, but okay. And then finally, Malcolm says, I'm just going to pit one Thane against another and bring eternal warfare to Scotland, at which point Macduff says, you don't have a right to live, let alone to rule. And then Malcolm says this noble passion, the noble passion of Macduff, hath from my soul wiped the black scruples, reconciled my thoughts to thy good truth and honour. Oh, it was all a joke. I don't really mean what I said. I'm actually a virgin. I don't even want the things that I own, and I've never lied in my life. Well, none of that really makes much sense. You can't both be a person who never lies and a person who pretends in order to test out a Thane to see if they're going to be super loyal to you. So he is a super ambivalent and ambiguous figure. He probably will be a way better king than Duncan, but he is also very similar to Macbeth, who's also Machiavellian. So Malcolm goes on to ask Macduff, why are you silent? And of course Macduff answers, well, such welcome and unwelcome things at once. I can't actually reconcile them. And that idea of a thing being one thing and another at the same time, welcome and unwelcome, is exactly how Macbeth was thinking when he first met those evil witches. So Malcolm doesn't escape from the ambiguity that runs through Macbeth as a whole. So in other words, Shakespeare is saying, look, being a king is tough. It's not a matter of just being righteous and just and generous and benevolent. You've actually got to be pretty ruthless, and in some ways quite sly and, quite vicious. And that's underscored once more by the cyclical structure of the play. So at the end of the play, Macbeth is taken out. His head is chopped off and put on a stake. And Macduff does this to him in the same way that Macbeth slaughters, I think it's the Thane of, can't remember, but it's the Thane of whatever it is. He chops off the head of a Thane at the beginning of the play and sticks it on a spike. And Macbeth is in the same position regarding Duncan as Macduff is to Malcolm at the end. So if the positions are parallel, then what is to stop Macduff taking out Malcolm in the same way that Macbeth took out Duncan at the start? Shakespeare is kind of suggesting power is so naturally vicious and violent and greedy and selfish that the cycle of violence will be perpetuated. So this idea of a just and righteous king may be a bit of a fantasy. So that's how he critiques it. So that's done, guys. Thank you very much. Did it work?